minds. There were some kids that didn't like kids who were smart and got good grades. There were some kids who criticized the way I talk. They said that I talked like I was white, which was another way of saying that you think you're better than other people. So I had to contend with, how do I get my education when I'm surrounded by people who may have different expectations of me? And those just weren't the kids in the neighborhood. There were teachers I had to confront, teachers who underestimated me every step of the way. Even when I applied to Princeton, I write about in my book, and I tell this story all the time, even though I was at the top of my class and I was a class officer, I was a leader, when I sat down with my high school counselor, somebody who didn't know me but was assigned to work with students to help them apply to college, and I told them my intention was to apply to Princeton, that counselor told me, "I don't think you're Princeton material." The person whose job it was to help young people reach their dreams when it came to college saw me, and whatever she saw in me told her that my dreams were too high. And that cut me in a way that even though I continued on, I applied, obviously you know I got in, but I still remember that story. I remember that feeling of doubt, just another adult sort of placing a barrier on me that I didn't even have for myself. So then to enter into an elite school when your high school counselor has told you you're not good enough, when all of society sort of looks at kids of color or kids from poor communities or rural communities as not belonging. I, like many others, walked into that school with a stigma in my own head. More young people nowadays call it imposter syndrome. I don't know if they call it that in Britain, where kids like me feel like they don't belong, so they feel like they're faking it. And I had to get over that. And one of the ways that I got over it was that I looked around at Princeton and I saw kids who were not as talented or as gifted or as hardworking as I was. I learned that this notion of affirmative action sometimes only applies to kids of color or kids from different backgrounds or poor kids, but there are all kinds of affirmative action that take place in elite schools around the country, athletes who are admitted not because they're great students, but because they can add value, legacies, people who come from families with long lines within the school, they get admission. So I started to realize that the doubts that I had in my head were all mine. And I had to work to overcome that question that I always ask myself, am I good enough? And I write about that. That's a question that has dogged me for a good part of my life. Am I good enough to have all of this? Am I good enough to be the First Lady of the United States? And I think that many women, and definitely many young girls of all backgrounds, walk around with that question. But how I overcame that is how I overcome anything: hard work. So whenever I doubted myself, I just told myself, let me put my head down and do the work, and I would let my work speak for itself. And I still find that I do that. I still feel that at some level I have something to prove because of the color of my skin, because of the shape of my body, because of who knows how people are judging me. But it takes some time and it takes some maturity to start having some successes under your belt where you realize, yes, in fact, I am good enough.